Hello, monotypers. Today I'll be doing a little different video than what I usually do, and instead it'll be a guide as to how you can build more unique teams in Gen 8 monotype. I hear a lot of people complaining, especially this generation, about how every team feels the same and that there's no room for uniqueness. But as the tier leader Chaitanya once said on one of his win posts, uh, he said that there is room to be very creative in Gen 8. It's just that you have to look for it and you have to know how to make correct meta calls. And it's very hard for new players to do this because they're not adjusted to the metagame and they don't completely know the metagame. And they might end up just thinking, oh, well, if I use Malamar on Psyche, that's clearly the best thing ever because it's just so OP. It just uses superpower. And no, it's never like that. So as you can see in this replay, I have Inteleon on a water team. Now Inteleon is a D rank mon, and the reason why I like using this mon is because it actually accomplishes something and it has a niche that I really like. It's a very fast revenge killer that's kind of like Greninja, but it's not really. Now, I won't click on the replay because the game is actually pretty boring, but I will tell you that in this replay, Inteleon actually does get a few key kills on a couple of fast Pokemon like Terrakion, and it's because of his speed that he was able to achieve this. Because if I had like another Pokemon, like let's say Cloyster, on there, I wouldn't have been able to achieve that, and I would have to use like Scarf Keldeo, and I'm not really particularly a fan of that set. I feel like CM is just so much better, and I didn't want to use like another slow mon in Primarina, so that's why I have Inteleon on there. And also, this mon gets really dangerous once it gets low, which I know you can't rely on all the time, but it's still pretty good. But yeah, that's why I like using Inteleon on that water team, and now I'll teach you, all you new players, how to actually make a proper unique team using monotype Pokemon. So let's go into the first thing, and I'll have the timestamps in the description below if you want to skip around to different chapters. But the first thing we're going to cover is the viability rankings. Now, the viability rankings are made by this beautiful person here, Decem, and his council of three other people, Conflux, Harp, and Maroon. The viability rankings are a really, really viable resource because it helps you figure out which Pokemon you should be using on your team. Now, if you like using, let's say your favorite Pokemon is Frostmoth, but you see it's C rank, and you're just like, darn, I can't use Frostmoth because it's a bad Pokemon on Bug. That's not true. You can still use it if you really want to. You just have to use it in the correct way and know when to use it. So for example, here are your S-rank Pokemon, Durant and Shuckle. Why are Durant and Shuckle so good? Think about it for a little bit. Why do you think Durant would be good? Well, let's look at the things that stand out about Durant, right? I promise I won't ramble on this for too long, but Durant has a good steel typing, which is always good because it gives it some defensive utility, allows it to switch into toxic spikes. Um, Generally just a good typing to have because it has a lot of resist attached to it. It also has quite a nice attack stat. It has the ability and hustle, which makes its power even better. And it can also hold a life orb, a choice band, or any of that. And it hit really hard with like first impression. It also has access to Iron Head. It can even use Hone Claws if it wanted to set up, become even more dangerous. It just has a lot of coverage options with Stomping Tantrum, Rock Slide, Stone Edge, Superpower. You name it, it's got a coverage option for it. Well, it's not that big of a coverage Pokemon, but it still has quite nice coverage. It even has Facade if you really want to like hit people with Burn, who burn you. But yeah, Durant is just a really solid Pokemon, and its offensive capabilities just drives it to the top because it is definitely stronger and faster than the rest of the Pokemon that are featured on this list. Like Gliscod pales in comparison to what Durant can potentially do. So that's why that Pokemon is S rank. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, what about all the other Pokemon? I'll be actually doing a series talking about every individual type and how to be creative with them later on during the year. But for now, I'm just going to teach you guys the basics. So we won't get into the specifics with Bug in particular, but just know that if you figure out how the S-rank Pokemon function, you can usually figure out how the entire type is able to function. Because there are a few exceptions to this, like for example, Ice. Last gen on Ice, Ninetales wasn't S-rank, but let's take another good example, Avalugg and Mamoswine, actually. Mamoswine is a really, really good Pokemon on Ice. Like, you'll probably see it on almost every single Ice team that you encounter, because it's literally just one of the best Pokemon. It has a ground immunity, it has an electric immunity, excuse me, it can also set Stealth Rocks, it's also just insanely powerful on its own right, has access to Ice Shard for priority, it's just very good. Very, very good Pokemon. But it's not S-rank. And despite that, some people may think like, oh, maybe Mamoswine isn't necessary. You might be right, but Mamoswine is really, really good. Do not understate it just because it's not S rank. But yeah, even if we look at the rest of the ISIS S ranks, you see Darmanitan, Galar, Kyurem Black, and Ninetales Alola. All offensive Pokemon, and Ninetales Alola has the Aurora Veil, which makes Ice even better. But yeah, you can literally tell from these three Pokemon that, like, okay, Ice is clearly supposed to be a really offensive type. Maybe using slow Mons probably isn't the best. They're trying to make a balanced core isn't really the best idea. Now, you can use really slow Mons like Avalugg, Piloswine, obviously, but it functions best as an offensive type. Trying to use it defensively or like a bounce type is not going to work out, because it doesn't have the support to do that properly. But yeah, we'll be going into the specifics later, but just know that look at the S ranks for every single type, and you can figure out from there what Pokemon you want to use. So next up, we'll be talking about analyses. So unfortunately, we don't have analyses for every single Pokemon on the viability rankings yet. But for the ones that we do, you should take a close look and see how some of them function. Like, for example, let's look at Hydreigon on Dark. The analyses are very, very good for covering how to deal or at least use certain Pokemon on teams. So like on this choice, we learned how to use two different sets for Dark, which are Choice Specs and Nasty Blow. Now you know what sets most of them run, and you can even import the set using this button right here and paste it right into your team. But yeah, Hydreigon is just able to do a lot of things, and it describes that very well in these articles. They are quality controlled, so usually they come out with really, really good information that's very, very useful. And you should really use this resource as much as possible. If your Pokemon has analysis, read it, because you might learn something new about that Pokemon or something very useful that you may not have thought about using Pokemon like before, because these are usually made by respectable players that actually know the metagame really well. So please make sure that you use these resources and don't forget these, because you will regret not reading these. But yeah, besides that, that's pretty much it for viability rankings and for analyses. So let's talk about the actual team building itself. So right here we have a little bug team. So you might be thinking, so let's say your favorite Pokemon is Frostmoth. Let's get the example from before. So Frostmoth, obviously its weaknesses are pretty obvious. It has a giant ice weakness. Well, not ice weakness, but like it's really weak because of the ice type. It's weak to rocks, it's weak to fire, steel, just so many things. But what it offers back in return is quite some nice offensive power, and a really good matchup against certain types, especially water. So what this mon is very good at is setting up Quiver Dance, as you can see here, and using its not really diverse range of moves, but it has a pretty decent range of moves that it can use, like Ice Beam. It can also use Air Slash, Bug Buzz, Giga Drain, has all sorts of moves that it can use. But yeah, you might not be able to figure out like exactly what it is, and if you have a question, you can always go to the monotype room or to the monotype Discord, and you can always ask like, how do I use X and X Pokemon? And usually, if the people are helpful there, they will tell you like a set or an ideal set that you can use. But I would try and, because there's a lot of new players, there's usually some misinformation being spread around. Like some people might tell you like, oh, you should use Calm Mind on Frostmoth. Don't do that. Literally don't do that. You can literally use Quick Dance and accomplish the same exact thing. Um, but yeah, in order to know like whether or not you should be listening to X and X person's advice, make sure to see if they have a plus or any other symbol in front of their name. Because if it comes from a person like that, that means that they're qualified and know the metagame very well, and you can usually like take their advice. So if like because rarely do ranked users in a monotype room give bad advice. So for example, let's say I want to use Frostmoth and some random player with no symbol says, oh, well, I think Frostmoth is really good with acrobatics because if you just use an itemless thing, you can use actually wait, that's a bad example. I think Frostmoth on Bug is really good with Defog because it can come in really easily and then just get rid of rocks, and that's so good for Bug. But the ranked user might come in and say, no, that's not true. You don't want to use Defog because that's a momentum drain, and also most of your Pokemon have heavy duty boots anyway. So you want to increase your offensive power as much as possible with Frostmoth. So just use Quiver Dance and 3 attacks. That's usually better. And boom. That would be an example of like taking good advice from a good user. And usually they'll explain themselves. If you want people to explain themselves, just ask for it. You just have to be polite about it. Don't be like, oh, I don't think your set is good. Explain to me why you think it's good. Don't be like that. Do not be like that. Otherwise, no one wants to help you. But yeah, that's all you have to do about asking for help. Because trust me, all players have to ask for help during their career. You can ask our tier leader, you can ask me, you can ask literally any player, Pokemon, or even any competitive game. We all have to ask for help. You didn't get there by yourself. There are no such thing as prodigies. Everyone asks questions in order to get to the place where they are. Because guess what? You don't know everything, and you can't learn everything on your own. That's why we have communities for these sort of things. Because we help each other grow, and we help each other become the best that we can be. And that's why you should ask for help from the monotype room. Now, if you feel like they're giving you some advice that's like leading you to a more uncreative team or something that you don't really like, just state it out flat that I don't want to use X and X Pokemon. I want to use this niche Pokemon for these reasons. And if you have good reasons, note this: good reasons, like not using like freaking let's say what's a bad Pokemon on Bug? Uh, let's say okay, so let's just say I don't want to use a Scavalier because I don't like how Durant looks. Don't be like this. Do not be like this at all. State the reasons why you want to use a Scavalier. State what you think it does in the metagame that Durant doesn't. Mention the fact that it has Overcoat or something, so it's immune to like Stun Spore and like Sleep Powder and all that. Mention that it has access to close combat, which is something Durant doesn't have access to, and it makes him weaker against steel types in general. Mention how it has a really disgustingly high attack stat. Mention how it has access to facade and knockoff, and also a bunch of other decent moves that it can hit really hard with, and it can also have sword stance to boost its power even further. Mention all of those things, and maybe the mods will listen to you, because they will try and make you use the best Pokemon, because if you're a new player, you should be using the best Pokemon on the type before trying to branch off. But for the more experienced mid-level players, you should definitely try and like branch out from the ordinary, because like if you just use like the same old teams every time, you get predictable and you just like don't you have a lot less fun, first of all, and you also just become a lot more predictable and easy to read. So it's like, even if you play really well with like standard teams, you can get pretty far, but it just gets really, really bad. Especially because if you play like the same teams, because I did this a lot in the last generation when I started using Fairy, I just felt like I was using the same team every single time, and it was just like, this is so boring. This is really boring. Like, I don't want to use the same team every single time with the same mons and the same plays. Like, it just gets boring after a while. So you have to shake things up, and you also have to do it for tournaments, so that way you can catch your opponent off guard, so they don't know what to do against a certain Pokemon or type, because they might have counterplay for the standard, but they might not have counterplay for your specific team. That's why something like Frostmoth might shake someone up, because someone could think, oh, well, I'm going to be safe using Flying against this guy because he doesn't really have any Pokemon that can deal with it. Boom, send out Frostmoth. Frostmoth literally completely destroys Flying, almost completely destroys Flying, along with Galvantula. Um, but yeah, this mon does have a niche. It's very useful at its niche, but it has to be supported properly. And that's the next thing we'll talk about. Supporting your bad Pokemon. Well, not your bad Pokemon, but your niche Pokemon. So, Frostmoth. Frostmoth is obviously a really, really weak Pokemon. Very paper-thin defenses, except for its very good special defense stat, especially with Ice Scales. Broken ability. But, yeah, what it does best is clearly the Quiver Dance set, so let's just do a random set for now. Giga Drain and Bud Buzz, so that way we have stat. Make it fast special sweeper, excuse me. And give it heavy duty boots because literally, do you want to be taking 50% with this thing? I don't think so. But yeah, and then we use the S rank Pokemon because usually, I wouldn't say every single type on every single team. You can use the S rank Pokemon on the type and just get away with it because like a few types you can get away with not using the S rank Pokemon. Like there are a few fairy teams that don't use Gardevoir, and you can just use Hatterene just fine. Like not every single team needs to have all the S ranks. Like your team isn't bad if it doesn't have all the S ranks. The S ranks are just like the best Pokemon on the type. It doesn't mean that they all need to be on the type, if that makes sense. Like Hatterene and Gardevoir are like really, really redundant. So that's why you don't see them on the same team a lot. But like you'll see Mimikyu and Hatterene, Mimikyu and Gardevoir. Like you're gonna see that a lot, but you won't see Gardevoir and Hatterene a lot. And the reason being is because they just don't fit very well together, and like I said before, they're redundant. So, yeah, that's why you have to shake up what you use, and also just not use like every single S rank Pokemon, no, and it always asks for advice, like which Pokemon you want. But yeah, before we get sidetracked again, just gonna put this shuffle set together. We're gonna use knockoff and encore. Probably should make him physically defensive. But yeah. So while I make this team, I'm gonna explain a few things to you guys. But essentially, when you use a more niche Pokemon, you have to accomplish a goal with it. Because in monotype, every single Pokemon needs to serve a purpose on the type. You can't just use a Pokemon just because it looks cool. Because if you have that mindset, you'll never get far in competitive Pokemon, period. You need to have a reason to use every single Pokemon on this team. It has to have a reason or a use. And the use can't be something as simple as, oh, it just hits a really strong move. It has to be deeper than that. It has to be able to like carry an MU, for example. It has to be able to power through certain teams, beat common checks, anything like that. It just needs to be able to do. So like Escavalier, for example, it's not able to do anything that Durant can't already do for the most part. Because even though I did mention the superpower close combat thing before, Escavalier is literally so pitifully slow. And while it does have alright defensive, it literally will die to a fire attack or like to any physical attacker that's really strong. And its stab combination, well, no, it has the same stab combination as Durant, except Durant can at least hit and run a little bit better. But like Escavalier is just like, it's so slow. And it doesn't really have that many benefits that Durant has, except for like, what does it actually have? Oh, it does have Metal Burst. That's sick. But unfortunately, Metal Burst is, well, actually, never mind. You're gonna get hit by it anyway. But like, yeah, don't use Escavalier over Durant because that's just a bad idea. But you don't want to use Escavalier and Durant because that's redundant, and you don't want to have the same Pokemon on the same team, essentially. So yeah, that's the thing. You have to know like how every type works and how you're gonna accomplish what you want to accomplish with your team. So like with this bug team with Frostmoth, I plan on being able to beat let's say not grass because we already have a natural immune against grass. What else does ice hit? Flying and also dragon. So let's say we want to have a better matchup against dragon, let's say, because we just feel like Bombi isn't cutting it. So we're going to use Frostmoth to cover the MU better. Or maybe we just don't want to use Bombi, period. And we want to use a different Pokemon entirely, like maybe Orbeetle or something. So that way we can cover a different matchup. You have to have a reason why we're doing things. So Frostmoth is actually an alright alternative to Ribombee, but it's not the best, obviously. But if you're trying to accomplish something else with the team that requires you to not have Ribombee because it drains the ability to do that, that's how you make a good team. You have to have a purpose for why you're using that strategy. So yeah, Frostmoth is essentially the Ribombee replacement. Even if it's not an all good one, it's still a replacement for the sake of this team. So Frostmoth does get carried by the fact that a lot of the other Pokemon on this team are very good offensively. And now that we have something that can help deal with Dragon and Flying a little bit better, we're going to use a Pokemon that we wouldn't be able to use before. So instead of using Ribombee, we'd use someone a little bit more niche. So, oh yeah, Frostmoth is also much better against ground, which we do have a natural resistance against, but you'd be surprised how hard it is for certain Pokemon to actually deal with ground, especially Excadrill. That mon is really tough to deal with. But yeah, now we can use stuff like Crustle, because before we just did not feel like it would fit on the team very well without Ribombee, let's say. So by getting rid of Ribombee, we're able to use Crustle a little bit more effectively. This isn't a good example, by the way, because you could definitely still fit Ribombee on this team. But like, let's say in an imaginary world, um, Ribombee was just preventing you from using Crustle properly, we'd be able to pull this off, for example, and then use this team. And yeah, there you go. We're able to successfully create a team that still does a lot of the things that Bug is known for, like just very good webs offense. You can still accomplish that very well with this team, but now you have Frostmoth on it, and you can actually use it relatively well because you actually made the correct meta calls. And now we're going to move on to the last chapter of this entire thing, and that's how to measure your success with your niche strategy. So, a common thing that I see on Showdown in general, not even just monotype, just in general, even in OU, you just tend to see a lot of people like boasting about their ladder elo and the strategies they use, and like posting replays like, "Oh, I'm so good because I use this Pokemon." Like, don't do that. Don't be that guy because guess what? It really doesn't matter because ladder is like not good for showing success with a team. It's good for testing teams, but it's not good for showing how good a team is. Because the quality of the ladder has always been notoriously bad. because you might get matched up against someone that's like absolutely terrible, and they're like in the 1600s, but you completely beat them out, and you're like in, let's say, the 1300s. But that's literally like horrible matchmaking, and you shouldn't have gotten that person, but you'll still win, and it'll be like, why is that person higher than me? It's really ridiculous how disgusting the ladder is. And also there's type matchups, which is monotype specific. You might get like the worst MU for the Pokemon you're using, and you're just like, I don't want to keep losing to this type. I'm going to go make a team that counters it. And you're not going to accomplish anything by trying to do that, because then you just completely one-gear yourself into beating that specific type. And yeah, you might win against that type eventually, but like, at what cost? You literally sacrifice a bunch of MUs. Like, let's say I don't want to lose to Rock anymore, so I just end up getting rid of every single Rock weak Pokemon except for Shuckle, and then replacing it with like Escavalier or something. Like, yeah, I might win against Rock now, but like, now I just lose to other types that can deal with Escavalier just fine. And now I'm missing one of my other key Pokemon that would have helped with another matchup. So like, let's say I drop Scorch for Escavalier. Now suddenly Steel has a much easier time against me because it can wall my entire team. I don't have a single fire type to deal with any of their nonsense. So that's just a thing you have to look out for, and you also have to be careful of. But also, to completely measure your success, I would say use tournament games. Just join a tournament. There's not a ton of monotype tournaments, but when one comes up, always sign up for it, because even if you don't win, you get to see how your strategy does against higher level players. So, because it's possible, because a lot of random people used to beat like Ian when he was the tier leader. He always lost to randoms that were using really heat tech, and eventually that would be, well, not all of it would become meta stuff, but it's usually a good start into seeing like if this strategy is actually good. For example, when I started the D rank warriors, when I did the Inteleon thing, I was pretty impressed with how good Inteleon was. And I thought, well, this mod is interesting. I guess I'll go use it a little bit more. And then I started bringing Inteleon to tournament games, and I started winning. And I was just like, wow, I guess this Pokemon really is good. Because Isle of Love is no slouch. Isle of Love is actually a player that beat Chaitanya, who is currently one of the best monotype players of all time. And he was able to beat him 2-0 in a No John's tour. And that's pretty impressive in its own right. So if I was able to beat a player of caliber enough to beat Chaitanya, then with Inteleon of all things, that just goes to show, like, okay, yeah, clearly the water team I have is pretty good. And clearly Inteleon is able to really carry its weight, especially on water, thanks to its ability to carry the niche that I was selected for. So yeah, that's just a general idea of how to actually team build in Gen 8 Monotype. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And if you're curious as to how to deal with your specific type, don't worry. I'll be starting a series on this, and I'll be covering every single type on how to build creatively for it. Because every type is different, I wouldn't do justice talking about every single type in one video. So we're going to make individual videos about each type and how to build creatively for them. But this is just a general idea, because you'll be seeing the same things and the same strategies that I'll be using throughout the video that I mentioned here. So just keep these things in mind. Just as a TLDR of what to do when you're trying to use a niche Pokemon. Have a purpose for the Pokemon on your team, for starters. Make sure you use the S-rank Pokemon on the team to give you a good idea of what to use. Ask for help to make sure you're using the optimal set for your said Pokemon. Don't be afraid to look for analyses or use Smogon to figure out if you're like how to use that Pokemon specifically. And lastly, always don't mess up and think that ladder is the end all be all if your team is good. Because a lot of good players don't do well on ladder because of random ladder shenanigans that people like to run. because they just get paired up against like a lot of bad MUs, for example. Don't get discouraged if you get MU'd a bunch on ladder and you think the strategy isn't good. Your strategy might be good, it's just that you're running into a lot of BS on ladder, and that's not the best, and that's always a bad feeling. But keep your head up, and you can even ask for games specifically so you don't have to go on the ladder. There's a lot of people on Showdown that'll play with you, even the mods will play with you, and you can even ask them to give you a specific type. Don't be afraid to ask. But yeah, that's the entire guide. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Subscribe for more. And I'll be releasing a series very, very soon. So have fun.